An always interesting San Francisco 49ers offseason, getting even more interesting now as we approach the new league year in 2025. Tons of players flooding the market, trade and free agency. And according to reports, the 49ers roster possibly about ready to take some hits. Lowballing Brock Purdy, all that and more coming up on today's Locked On 49ers.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker with you at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Love our everydayers. We appreciate you. Hit the thumbs up. Let us know you stop by if you're on YouTube. An impromptu live show this evening. We thought this was the right time to do a live show. We weren't recording earlier. So, with the news worthiness of the day, thought this was a good time to go live. So make sure you hit the notification bell so you know when we go live, even on days when we don't usually go live. You got to be ready to hang out with Peacock when there's stuff going on around the San Francisco 49ers, right? And if you're new to the program, welcome. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and everywhere you listen to your podcast. Croc. It kind of gets just like 1 degree weirder every single day and trying to decipher what the plan is for the San Francisco 49ers. And I almost don't know where to start. I think we should begin, though, with Brock Purdy. It's the biggest storyline of the offseason. And according to Adam Schefter, according to Jason La Canfora, the 49ers are kind of cranking up the intensity and maybe playing a little bit of hardball with this Brock Purdy contract negotiation. And Jason La Canfora put a number next to it. And it's a very interesting number, Croc, that Jason La Canfora put out there because it's kind of a number that we had talked about that we would feel more comfortable with Brock Purdy being at, right? And Jason La Canfora says the 49ers playing hardball with Purdy, saying that's very on brand for negotiations with the 49ers and that starting their offers at around $45 million per year. And the way it's worded by Jason La Canfora makes it sound like the 49ers are crazy for even thinking that they could sign Brock Purdy for 45. Like it's a disrespectful offer. And we talked about Brock Purdy. And it's like, man, $60 million sounds a little crazy. You got to be able to build a roster around him. And, something more like 45 million sounds more right for who Brock Purdy is and how the 49ers could build around him. And that's interesting that's where the 49ers are potentially and reportedly right now with Brock Purdy. But it also means that, like, this is not going to get done quickly. And we had talked about this. Why would we expect a deal that's twice as big as any contract they've ever done as an organization? Why would this one suddenly just get done really quickly? And all the other contracts that took forever for the 49ers, save maybe Jimmy Garoppolo, which ended up being somewhat of a team-friendly deal for how big it looked at the time because of the lack of guarantees, especially late in the contract. Why would you think that this would be an easy contract to do? And then you start hearing John Lynch talk about cash, and you hear reports from national and local reporters alike about how maybe the 49ers might need to cut back on some of the cash spending, and you have this big expenditure in Brock Purdy, and then you start drawing some lines and you start putting some of these reports together, Croc, and it's just a very interesting time. And we actually covered some of this with a big picture idea about whether or not the 49ers should go all in or really be building towards the future in the 2025 offseason. It's two completely different paths potentially. And we're starting to get some clues that maybe they are less all in now than they have been and might have more of an eye on the future than they have in recent years.
The starting number for Brock Purdy was very interesting, right? You and I did say in a perfect world, right? You take what other guys are making out of it. You feel comfortable paying Brock Purdy $45 million per year. Now, obviously, that's the 49ers starting point. So they assume that they will go up. But the starting point is the interesting part because how much more will they go up? Like, do you see the 49ers jumping up 10 million more per year? And I think most people thought it would be automatic that Purdy gets between 55 and 60 per year. And I know the biggest, most important numbers are, guarantees and how certain things are structured. But that's very telling because now it sounds like the 49ers may probably only want to go up to about 50 million per year during these negotiations. I think it's setting up, and if I'm Brock Purdy, right? And I think Brock Purdy believes I deserve more than some of these other guys that are getting paid that amount of dollars. He almost might be better off playing on his 4th year. Now, we'll talk about what Adam Schefter said about that, but let's say Jamar Chase, for instance. Jamar Chase was up for a contract extension, and the Bengals wanted to play hardball with him. He held out for a while, came back, but ultimately, whatever y'all tried to offer me, I'm not signing that. And then he goes out and breaks like every Cincinnati Bengal record and goes for 1,700. So now, whatever number you were thinking before, with the favorite line, yesterday's price is not today's price.
Oh, no doubt.
So if I'm Brock Purdy and you're even thinking about lowballing me, obviously there's the risk of injury and things like that, and you want to be wary of that. But man, I may go out there and play just so I can prove, like, nah, I'm a $60+ million per year guy and really maximize your income. I would definitely wouldn't take 45. And I would guess that the 49ers want to go around 50. I'm not taking that either if I'm Brock Purdy and Tua and Jordan Love and Trevor Lawrence and these guys that haven't had the kind of postseason success I've had are getting paid way more than me. Like, I just wouldn't sign that.
It can go both ways. And we saw the opposite version with Brandon Ayuk, who played hardball, and it was a good thing he got his contract, because if he played through the season and tore his ACL, that would have really affected his pocketbook. And for Brock Purdy, who's not a bonus baby, and because of the CBA, he's not going to make like the $1 million base this year. He would make around $5 million, because there's extra money in the pool for players who outperform, their rookie late round contracts, like someone like Brock Purdy did, obviously. So it's still, though, not, he didn't have a first round contract, wasn't making, tens of millions of dollars of base salary every single year throughout his rookie contract. And for Brock Purdy, I can't imagine, and I think it was RDC here in the chat says, is Brock the kind of guy who would sit out? I think it's every kind of guy that would sit out, because at least the agent would say, like, there's no way you can play football this year because of the negative far outweighs the positive of what could happen to you if you were to somehow get hurt. Dak Prescott had already had a contract, and you could sit out in that sort of a way, and it gets very difficult to play when it's your best shot and you could ruin your only shot at a payday, because maybe you make 200 instead of 150 million, but you could also make 0 million if something catastrophic happens injury wise. So that's a difficult one for me. And if I'm Brock Purdy's agent, there's no way I show up and do anything that could possibly get me injured until I get a new contract. Although the 49ers could play hardball with it. And we talked a little bit about this off the air, Croc, and something that Adam Schefter brought up was talking about, well, look, there's the franchise tag, and the 49ers haven't gone to this like the Cincinnati Bengals have with their players. We're seeing T. Higgins on the second franchise tag now, but $5 million this year. The franchise tag is what, $41 million for quarterbacks, and then it goes up to $50 million if you got tagged twice. And so you start doing the math, and you're like, okay, well, if you got a $50 million contract for 3 years, you'd be making $50 million more over the course of 3 years if you just took that deal versus trying to play it out and go in the franchise tag route. And so that's like the leverage that a team has. But the 49ers haven't flexed that leverage with anybody, not with Ayuk, not with Bosa, not with anybody. They haven't gone to that point where they let the player play out their contract. The contract ends, then they go to franchise tag years. They haven't done that. And maybe they should have done that in the past with somebody to show the next guy, we could do this to you. So I don't know what to think about how the negotiations will go. I know the $45 million number is not the number that it'll end on, even though we said that that's what should maybe be the number. And I think that is the right number. That's
in a perfect world.
Right.
Like
I think that's what it would be and is what it's going to be. But what it should be is probably something more like $45 million, which is a lot of money, a huge payday for Brock Purdy. But you have to build a team around him. And then you start getting the reports about the cash spending. And that's coming from ownership in the organization. And I do want to talk a little bit about that too, Croc, because I think some people are pointing at Jed York and the 49ers with some of these stories and being like, oh, now all of a sudden you're going to get cheap. It's like, man, they've spent this isn't the organization to be talking about them being cheap with how much money they've spent with how much money they will have to spend on just a Brock Purdy contract. You have to think about how much money goes into this. It's not just salary cap dollars. They have to throw a couple $100 million into escrow to get this kind of a massive contract done. If it's a 4 or 5 year deal at $50+ million, that's an insane amount of guarantees. It's twice as many guarantees as the Nick Bosa contract, which is the hugest contract in franchise history, who they've already had to pony up and put some money in escrow for that. And so you're talking about how many hundreds of millions of dollars in cash that's tied up to sign these star players and have all the guarantees. It's not a factor of the 49ers being cheap at all. And you could point to the York family and how they've run things for a while. And some weird stuff that's happening in the 49ers organization, but the Shanahan Lynch era and trying to say Jed York is all of a sudden being cheap on this, I don't think is it. That's not the way I would go with this critique.
I don't think that they're being cheap, but like you said, it could be a cash thing. And we talked about the Khalil Mack thing where the Raiders just didn't have enough. Now, back then, and especially with Khalil Mack, that's a non-quarterback, the money that they had to put in escrow wasn't nearly what we're talking about with the 49ers. So you got all these players that high-priced players. You're paying a lot of money to the guarantees, the Brandon Ayuk, the guarantees to Nick Bosa, and now you're talking about an even larger contract. And why it is difficult because they haven't paid anybody anything remotely close to what they'll have to give Brock Purdy. So, I know I talked about playing out the 4th year. Obviously, like that is super risky, but when we always talk about who has leverage in situations, it's hard to see the path where he has leverage when he hasn't made money. Chris Jones sat out, and it's like, man, whatever. I'll sit out as many weeks as it takes for me to get the contract I want. But I'm sitting on some M's in the bank. I'm good. Brock hasn't had that type of money being made. So not saying, maybe he can't get an advance from his agent or something who can maybe hold him over until this thing gets settled down. But that I think it's a little tougher for him to take that stance at this point, especially when there is a lot of probably conversation even in the building with exactly how much he is worth. Like, do you just go with what a lot of the fan base says? Hey, the market is X amount of dollars, or do you say like, well, yeah, we see what those guys, we're not trying to get in that position that those guys got in with a quarterback of this talent and kind of where he's at in the tier of QBs. So we're more comfortable with this. You could take it. If you don't, then we could play a hardball, but we're not going above 50 per year. And that may be a tough conversation to have.
More ramifications this offseason of the 49ers cash spending and cash that will not be spent and where that might be, according to reports. Next. This episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by Chewy. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet healthcare, Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. Over 100,000 products from all your favorite brands. Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food and treats and beds and grooming. And we're talking not just cats and dogs, but birds, fish, reptiles. My guy Matt Williamson has a bird named Larry Bird that he's always getting Chewy delivers for him. And happy 8th birthday to Larry Bird, by the way, today, in fact. So not just food, but pets' health as well. Prescriptions, telehealth vet visits, and even in-person vet clinics are rolling out nationwide at Chewy. And auto ship has been a game changer for us. So you never run out of those food or treats. And Chewy has everything you need. So right now, you can save $20 off on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking on the link in the description. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking on the link in the description on the podcast. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. All right, Croc. So even beyond the quarterback situation, which is one thing, and if you're wondering why maybe cash has to come out of one part of the football team, it's because what we just talked about. There's hundreds of millions of dollars potentially going into another part of the football team that wasn't being spent, which is now the quarterback. So it's going to change the dynamic of the rest of the football team. And that's kind of what we've been talking about a lot. And we get in these arguments with some fans and they think we're disrespecting Brock Purdy. And it's just the realities of the business. And it's the realities of, okay, you can build a super team around a cheap quarterback. That's going to change when you have a super expensive quarterback. It's just going to change. Where that comes from, I don't know. And according to Adam Schefter, who went further into it with the 49ers on his podcast, he said, and shout out to Rob Guerrera, who had the official quote here on Twitter, so I can read it for you. This roster is going to take some hits, and everybody's going to feel it. I think this is the start of what's going to be a busy offseason in San Francisco, talking about trading Deebo Samuel being the first move, and it won't be the last move. And it's interesting, Croc, because remember when John Lynch had the weird answer to the Brandon Ayuk question, right? And I thought, on reflecting upon it more, I said, I think what he's saying is people are available, so league, call us. And he was that answer was more not to the fans, not to the reporters. That was to the other 31 teams in the NFL. Like the 49ers could be willing to listen to a lot of people and more players, including Brandon Ayuk, that maybe we would have thought to begin the offseason would not be available in a team that was still maybe in all-in mode. And the other thing that it tells me is that, and according to other reports, that guys like Dre Greenlaw, Aaron Banks, Talanoa Hufanga, you can probably say goodbye to those guys. Right. And it probably means they're not going to bring in big time free agents. They're probably not going to make a big splash move for Devontae Adams. They're probably not going to make a big splash move for Myles Garrett. Nick Bosa's big brother, Joey Bosa, was released today. What kind of contract is he going to command? Are they just only going to subtract salary and only add rookies this offseason? Is it going complete rebuild mode would be my question. And then on top of that, Croc, if that's the way they're going, why do the quarterback deal at all? Maybe the quarterback might be the best way that you rebuild, because you don't want a bare cupboard around your quarterback. And that's kind of been a point of all this about Brock Purdy and how much you pay him.
Well, what do you mean by he? So are you saying like don't play him, maybe draft somebody younger? And
I've been saying all along that you do the thing that the Rams just perfectly stuck the landing on with Matthew Stafford. Is you let him seek a trade, you find the market, you either pay that market or you collect draft picks. It's so simple and so obvious to me. And the Rams just did it to perfection. And they ended up keeping their guy.
Did.
Yeah.
They did. And there were teams, I think they said the Las Vegas Raiders were willing to pay $100 million guaranteed.
Yeah, 2 years fully guaranteed at 50 per, I think the Giants and the Raiders were both willing to do something close to that.
But yeah, you do find out exactly what the market is. And then you can make the decision on whether we want to meet that or not. And with the Rams, I wonder if there's kind of all right, we won't give you 100 guaranteed, but we'll give you 87. Have we seen official numbers from the Matthew Stafford? Because I haven't seen any numbers floating around. It's almost like they kind of kept it under wraps. Whatever they're agreed upon.
Whatever the thing that the other teams were willing to pay is what the Rams are going to pay. I think it's going to be a 2-year, fully guaranteed 50 mil per. So 100 million, 2 years, 95 million for 2 years, all guaranteed, I think is what it's going to be. I don't think we've seen the details yet on what that is yet, but
you were spot on with just the way to go about it, right? Like truly find the market. Now here's the thing, right? Matthew Stafford, even at age 37, he's a damn good quarterback still. He's still playing at a high level. His market was 50 million per year, not 53, not 55 like some of these other guys, not 60. It's like, hey, we're willing to pay you 50. And he found out exactly what that was. And then the team could be like, all right, we're going to meet. The 49ers, do you think that there's a way to do that without making your quarterback a little disgruntled? Like, is there a way to say, you know what, look, this part is just business. If we get this thing done, you're a 49er. Like, that's all that matters. But we got to kind of throw some bait out there so that we're all in understanding of exactly what this situation is.
Yeah. I mean, it's just business. It's not like there isn't hard feelings when they're doing these hard negotiations and there's holdouts into August and September anyway, right? So get it done now. Just figure it out. And if how are you going to close that gap? If the Niners are coming in at 45 and Brock's coming in at 60 or whatever the number is, I don't know. They've gone into August and September for what, $1 million a year, $2 million a year. How hard is it going to be to close the gap on $10 million a year? And so that's my whole thing is like, look, if you think that this is what Brock Purdy should get, go find it and go. They did this with DeForest Buckner. It would be the same conversation. Like, look, Brock, we love you. We want to be able to build a team around you. We need to be able to spend around you as well. This is what we would like to do. If you think you can go find what you're looking for somewhere else and win there, then go find it and bring us back 2 first round. Like, if you are a $60 million quarterback, that comes with massive draft picks. That don't come back with a 3rd round draft pick. Come back with 2 first round draft picks, right? Because that's what that should take. And nobody's going to pay that. And so that's kind of would be the conversation. It's like, okay, and then when you come back and everyone else is like 47, 49, 51, and they only want to give us a 2nd round draft pick, be like, okay, that's kind of what we thought. Let's get this done. That's the market. Now that we found it, let's do a deal. We love it. Let's go. Let's do the market deal.
Kenny in the chat says he thinks that the 49ers know that the market, essentially teams, looking for a quarterback, will actually pay more for Brock than the 49ers are willing to right now. What are your thoughts on that?
I've said this before. I think Brock Purdy is the rare case and the rare player that actually, and there's been a few of these guys. I think Tua was the same. I think there might have been some other quarterbacks, especially the quarterback deals, maybe some wide receiver deals, where if you just let the guy, if he was a free agent, like we saw what Kirk Cousins got last year, that's right about where Brock Purdy should be. Would Brock Purdy get $10-15 million more than Kirk Cousins got on the open market last year? Like, what teams are lining up to pay Brock Purdy that? That would be my question. And actually, if we're going to Jason La Canfora, he said basically that last week. He said that there's a lot of GMs around the league that don't think that Brock Purdy is a $60 million quarterback, right? Like they wouldn't pay that. They don't think that's what Brock Purdy is. And so, again, and Brock Purdy's awesome. This is why I hate this conversation, is it makes you seem like you're talking bad about Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy is awesome, right? And if a team like the New York Giants is willing to do that and they want to give you the 3rd pick in the draft, I would trade Brock Purdy for the 3rd pick in the draft all day long. If the team really, if he is valued that much around the league, okay, then let a team pay him 60, bring us the draft capital, right? I just don't think that's what he would get. He's the rare case where the open market would actually be a little bit muted versus what he's maybe asking. And I think Tua, if he was a free agent that same offseason, he would have got less than what the Miami Dolphins actually ended up paying him.
Almost like Brandon Ayuk, right? Like, I think, and I said the timing of the 49ers making Brandon Ayuk available through trade was terrible, but you still found out like a couple of teams were willing to pay, around $30 million per year. But they were never going to go 34, 35 like Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb, and they're definitely not going to go towards what, Jamar Chase is going to get. So there's still like that gap, right, of kind of like tiers of type of receivers where you have your, kind of 28, 29, $30 million guys in, but then there's a gap between the 34, 35 guys getting more than that. And I think I feel like there's a path to doing that with the quarterback, but like you said, with the Rams and other teams, you got to be willing to peek behind what's door number 2 and not just pay a guy just because, well, he's quarterback, he's up for pay. Like, especially when right now 49ers sounds like really kind of tight with the cap and trying to figure out certain things, trying to figure out how to squeeze this contract in there.
And again, I'll just ask you this, and anybody listening out there that thinks we're kind of crazy talking about what the quarterback market is, tell me which quarterback signed a deal and it was in the open market, right? That all these comps, they're like, oh, this guy made 50, this guy makes 55, this guy makes 53.5 million per year, whatever it is. Which one of those guys got that on the open market? Just answer me that. Johnny in the chat, you specifically, answer me that. All right. We will talk about Joey Bosa is available. Is he a fit for the 49ers? Should we expect any big name additions this offseason? Next. All right, so Joey Bosa has officially been released. Christian Kirk released by the Jaguars. Speaking of, basically, what's going on with the wide receiver market? Croc, by the way, Debo gets traded. Brandon Ayuk is available. DK Metcalf is, according to Jacina Anderson, teams are offering a 3rd-round pick for DK Metcalf, and he might be available, and he's asked to be traded the same day that Tyler Lockett has been released by the Seahawks. T. Higgins get the franchise tag. All these wide receivers are suddenly available or asking to be traded, or the team wants to trade them. Cooper Kupp has been, is probably going to be cut. I don't know if he might have been cut already. It's hard to keep up at this point. All these teams started paying wide receivers like defensive end money. And then like a couple of years in, it's almost like half of the teams are like, oh, wait a second, what are we doing here with these wide receivers? A little crazy money here for these wide receivers. Once the big money on those contracts starts to hit and they see how good every draft is with wide receivers, the wide receiver market's just kind of wild right now. And I don't even know what to think about it. Like, are they premium?
How did it get so inflated the way that it has? Because I feel like kind of happened damn near overnight. They were making about 20, 21, 22. And then something happened to where over the course of 2 years, it jumped up like $15, $16 million.
As one listener put it to me today on social media, it's Trent Baalke's fault. Blame everything on Baalke. Baalke signed Christian Kirk to that inflated deal, and so he was a second-tier guy that got Tier 1 money, so now the Tier 1 guys had to go over the top of him. So that was the theory there. And so, I don't know. 49ers fans love blaming Trent Baalke, so I guess we can run with that. But yeah, it was weird how it skyrocketed. Everyone started making more and more and more money. And there were some teams that weren't willing to pay, but most of them were. The Titans were like, yeah, no, we'll trade A.J. Brown. GM ended up getting fired, right? So it's like in some cases, it's like, yeah, you should have paid him. But then in a lot of cases, these teams don't want to keep paying those guys once they get to year 3, 4 of those big money contracts. Like how many wide receivers have actually seen the biggest money of those big money deals? Not very many yet.
Now, I think the toughest thing too, especially with receivers, if you just draft receivers every year, like just day 2, you'd probably be able to kind of just turn over having good receivers all the time. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers were kind of good at that, right? Just finding guys mid-round, late rounds, whatever, that just fit with what they do. And it's like, okay, you're really good. All right, we can move off of you, Emmanuel Sanders. All right, we can move off of you. We got Antonio Brown. Like they were kind of doing this thing where they were drafting good receivers, kind of developing them. Yeah, Emmanuel Sanders, Wallace, right? Mike Wallace. It was these guys where they're going to demand a lot of money, but man, we already got the next one ready to go, locked in. Obviously, they paid some of these guys some good bread. But if I'm the 49ers, especially in this offense, because I've complained about it a lot, but they aren't quite featuring a guy. That's why there's a lot of people clamoring, like, man, if you get rid of Debo, get rid of Ayuk, yeah, you got to start looking at receivers. I'm like, man, you draft somebody 11th overall at the receiver spot, you better use him like damn Malik Neighbors, who was targeted. Malik Neighbors had, it was like 10 double-digit target games. One game he's targeted 18. In Brandon Ayuk's all-pro season, he got one game with double-digit targets, and it was 10 on the dot. Like, that's the most targets he saw in the game. And so they're not really using guys like that. So to draft somebody at 11 and think like, oh, well, now I'm going to get this stud, and he's going to put up all these crazy numbers, it can really fluctuate with the 49ers from year to year. So I like the thoughts of, hey, man, every year we're going to take a guy in the 2nd or 3rd round, a receiver, and just we can kind of roll through that way so you don't have to end up paying a Debo Samuel where maybe you're kind of iffy, like, is he going to keep his weight down? Is he going to keep working hard? Oh, man, he just wants to be a wide back now. Brandon Ayuk is like, oh, $30 million a year. Like, is he going to start tripping? He just posted like a cryptic Instagram post. Yeah, I don't even know what he was trying to say. Maybe it was like song lyrics or something. I have no idea. But, you start dealing with all kind of like weird stuff with these guys a little bit. I love both of those guys as football players, but the 49ers are a rare team where, man, our offense isn't centered around these receivers in a sense. We can add guys. They do what we like them to do, be in the right spots. And, man, you could be Jawan Jennings drafted in the 7th round, who previously was cut by the 49ers, who can have nearly 1,000 yards. Marquise Goodwin. I mean, he came in to the 49ers. He was about 30 yards short from having 1,000-yard season, right? Like they've showed, man, we can be productive with these guys. I think if you draft enough mid-round guys each year to kind of mold them into that guy, they'd probably be better suited than forking out a bunch of money to him.
I'm with you on the wide receiver thing. And I've seen some Packers fans talking about, oh man, we got to draft a wide receiver in the first round. Should we bring in Devontae Adams? You know, and he was a former Packer, so I get that. But it's like, wait a second, what? The Packers are the shining example of the way to manage a roster at wide receiver. Keep drafting these second round guys. You got a lot of good young wide receivers that are competing, that are good players, that are capable, that you don't have to pay a lot of money to. And then when someone starts to hit free agency, you had another guy already developed that you drafted in the 5th round. So you have Dontavian Wicks who can take over for Watson. And then you have Jaden Reed in the slot, right? You have Romeo Dobbs. And it's like, that's the way to do it right there. I mean, that is the perfect example of how you build your wide receiver group, and you get it. You have these guys developed in advance. So you're not left with a guy who's like, oh, our offense is this guy at wide receiver and there's nobody behind it. You got to keep developing those guys, especially on the offensive side of the ball, because a wide receiver can take a little time, especially with Kyle Shanahan's offense. It takes a little time. So you got to be a year ahead, maybe 2 years ahead, because they might have that sophomore doghouse season, right? And when you're developing wide receivers. And
now, if you strike gold, that's different, right? Like I think with Antonio Brown and how it ended up turning out over like year 2, year 3, and trajectory he was on, it's just like, well, he's one of the best things we've ever seen in the Pittsburgh Steelers uniform. So then, okay, I kind of have to pay the guy. But if it's Deebo Samuel, where it's like, man, 1 year is amazing, then you haven't got that since. Or with even Brandon Ayuk, where the year before the All-Pro year, he had more targets and still only had, it was like 1,015 yards. It was like over 300 yards shy with more targets the year before, which told me, man, that guy's production, it could go up and down a little bit, and you have no idea either why or how or what. He wasn't missing games during that time. So, like, what was the difference, right, with more targets? Well, he averaged the second most of the time. He was at the top of the league in yards per reception. And same with Deebo Samuel. When Deebo was the 1400, top of the league in yards per reception. How consistent is that going to be with the 49ers? And then if it's not as consistent, you can see a huge hit with their production. So I think they got to be a little wiser about kind of the way they go about attacking the receiver position.
Yeah, and it's part of a bigger conversation about Kyle Shanahan and his offense, because Kyle always wants his toys for his offense. But how much better would the team be if all the resources were put at offensive line, defense, and then let Kyle scheme up the other stuff with the skill guys, instead of, wrapping up salary cap with 2 wide receivers and a tight end and a running back and a quarterback, because
and a fullback being the highest paid at his position.
I mean, still not that much money for the fullback, but he's the highest paid fullback in the NFL, or at least he was. He took a pay cut, I think, last year, and I don't know where he's at, but not a lot of fullbacks making a lot of money. But like, that's the cheat code you have, is how good Kyle Shanahan is at coaching those and scheming those parts of the team up. So should you not spend there and spend elsewhere where it's harder to utilize Kyle Shanahan's abilities as a head coach? And instead, the 49ers have ended up going the other way, not spend on the offensive line, aside from Trent. And that's, kind of gone a certain way. They've kind of got away from the defensive line a little bit, aside from Bosa. And then now you have a bunch of money on the offensive skill guys, where the 49ers are already good, and Kyle Shanahan is already good at scheming those things up. And so I wonder if that's what potentially a reset could look like. Obviously, it won't if you have a super expensive quarterback. Anyway, who doesn't take a pay cut, Croc? The Bosas. So unless he really wants to play with his brother that bad, it would have to be a sweetheart of I want to play with my brother for cheap deal to get Joey Bosa in San Francisco, even though he's available. And I would have bet that he would have been a Niner if he was a free agent last year, but he didn't hit free agency last year. Now he's available. I think it's much less likely now.
How do you work that in with John Lynch saying that he's trying to get younger?
Yeah, younger, cheaper, and healthier. Bosa is older, expensive, and hurt all the time. Like, that's the bad side of that trifecta.
That's one of the main things that, I've talked about even with this roster as well. Like, man, how do you get excited about guys who are either older, hurt, or older and hurt? And then Joey Bosa will kind of fit right in with that group. If John Lynch is true to his word and trying to get younger, then I don't know how you add him. Now, if you're taking the all-in approach, which we presented a few different options on the previous episode, talking about, do you go all in? Do you kind of toe that line a little bit? Or do you just blow the whole thing up? I think adding Joey Bosa will kind of toe that line. And that would be option B, where, hey, we're still trying to, if we can get him a little bit cheaper, but he's a talented player, come in next year, brother. Hopefully he stays healthy. Cross your fingers, but you're not holding your breath for it. That would mean, I think that would be B. I think that would be option B if they were to go get Bosa.
I'll just drop this little grenade at the end of the podcast here, Croc. You know who didn't get the franchise tag? Former and future 49ers quarterback Sam Darnold. Not franchise tag. So he's out there. So everyone is always like, oh, what do you do if you trade Brock Purdy? What do you, if this deal doesn't get done? We know Kyle loves him already. Kirk Cousins could be available. And here's where the Brock Purdy thing gets
real quick with Sam Darnold. There's two things we've found out, right? That I'm not saying he's the same as Brock Purdy, but we figured something out. When Sam Darnold's team is bad, he doesn't look like the greatest quarterback. Doesn't win a whole lot of games. When Sam Darnold's team is good, he won 14 games. You know what I'm saying? So, and Nick Bosa, when the team is good, team is rocking, they're healthy, you win a lot of games. Guys get hurt, it starts looking weird. Defense not, just shutting teams down. You win 6 games.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We got to get out of here. Appreciate you joining us in this live impromptu Wednesday night for your listening pleasure in your car in the morning on the way to work on Thursday morning. We love all our everydayers. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, but everywhere you get your podcasts.